that is the remnant of a supernova. And this supernova that created this the second Sirius star, which scientists call Sirius B, is the same event that created the macroscopic structure they're trying to point us to.
See, that's really, really interesting. So what does this mean to you in terms of, if we look at the symbolism for a little bit as well here, we obviously have a worldwide culture which has adopted a lot of symbolism that has to do with Sirius as well. And it's been suggested here and there, obviously, that the teachers actually who gave us and the Dogon this knowledge have a relationship with Sirius, and potentially that they even come from there themselves. What do you think about that?
That's absolutely a possibility. The Dogon seem to associate their teachers from Sirius with Sirius as if they had come from Sirius. In Buddhism, what are called the most sacred symbols are thought to have been given to us by a non-human source, according to Adrian Snodgrass. He doesn't go farther than that. He doesn't go so far as to say it was an alien source, but he does say it was a non-human source. In Egypt, there are, as I say, linguistic associations between a lot of the words of the cosmology and Sirius. So if someone came to me and said, "Time's up, you have to decide now, tell us what you really think," with no more research, I would guess that there was a Peace Corps effort that was promoted on our planet to try to raise us up from the level of hunter-gatherers to civilized beings about 3500 BC, and that it was a group from off the planet, probably from Sirius, that conducted that effort. And they conducted it on a global scale. So they created a single plan, which then was tailored in certain ways from region to region. The idea of the plan was that a tribesperson, when they came out of their hut in the morning, would see things in their daily environment that would automatically remind them of the things they'd been taught. And so everyday animals and structures and plants and activities would reinforce the cosmological teaching. And so to do that, if you need a symbol for a serpent, in India it might be a cobra, and in North America it might be a rattlesnake.
Right.
But it's the same symbol. If you need a horned animal, in one area it might be a bull, in another area it might be a ram, and another area it might be something else. So there was certain tailoring that went on to the plan to fit the region in which the plan was being taught.
Well, that makes absolute sense, obviously. Do you think that this is also where the origins lies in terms of our astrological symbols? Have they been given to us in the same manner? I know that there's a lot of researchers out there who are looking at this from the point of view that ancient man discovered this, and we eventually became telling stories with the aid of the star, so to speak. But we potentially might be looking at a situation where the constellations, so to speak, in their formation have been taught to us as well then, right, Laird?
Yes. When you start with this ritual shrine, the stupa or the Dogon granary, there's very complex sets of symbolism that associate with this structure. And one of the things they're trying to do, the structure the finished structure, as it presents in some of the cultures, is like a small pyramid, only with a round bottom, and staircases that go up the four sides. And each staircase is associated with certain animals in the animal kingdom. One of the things they're trying to accomplish is to provide us with a system for organizing zoology. And so you conceptually think of certain families of animals standing on certain stairs or certain staircases. One staircase is for insects, and one staircase is for fish. One staircase is for four-legged animals, and one is for birds. And so if you understand the symbolism of the structure, you also understand the relationship between these different families of animals and creatures. And it's that symbolism that, in my understanding, eventually produced what we see as astrology.
Do you think that some of the knowledge have been preserved to this day? Obviously, the Dogon is still around, so we still have a tradition there, obviously. But I guess what I'm reaching at is, in the Western world primarily, we can look at things like Freemasonry, for instance, which in many cases, in most cases, seem to come from a point of view where they're trying to understand their own symbols. They have a lot of Masonic scholars who are researching their own mythology, their own stories, so to try to understand them. But the serious connection here is kind of obvious to me. But maybe there's other things within Western esoteric traditions as well that echoes of this same story. Would you agree with that, Laird?
I would absolutely agree with that. I see the Masonic tradition as being an offshoot of the same system. Now, to try to understand any given symbol, you need to look for the earliest unperverted reference that you can find. Yeah. Now, in the case of the Dogon and Buddhism, we know for certain that Buddhism started at very least in the late centuries BC. In other words, just before the year 0. In the centuries just before that, we can trace stupas, and we know Buddhism existed. Now, in the Dogon system, we imagine that it goes back earlier than that. But because the two systems match each other, we can conclude from that neither one of them can possibly have changed substantially over time, because if they had, they would no longer match.
Right.
So we know with certainty that the Buddhist system and the Dogon system were a match at about the year 0 or just before.
And how far back do you go in terms of the knowledge of the Dogon then? How far back do you think the people have been around, and how you mentioned 13,500 BC? That's a date that usually comes up in a lot of this research, obviously. Do you think that at that given point, that's when they were given the knowledge, Laird?
The Dogon tradition that I'm studying seems to align best around 3500 BC. However, my friend John Anthony West is just back from Göbekli Tepe, which is a megalithic site in Turkey that is thought to be 12,000 years old. And before he left, I presented him with some papers that showed that most of the known symbolism at Göbekli Tepe ties in with the same system of cosmology I'm talking about.
Oh, now this is really interesting, because we had the main archaeologist, Klaus Schmidt, actually with us on the program here a while back, and that's going to be available on our website soon as well. And I asked him a little bit about that, some of the animals and some of the astrological aspect and things like that. And he wasn't really prone to go there. He understood the concept and agreed in that sense. But have you studied the site further, Laird? And if so, what can you say more about that?
Okay, I'll give you an example. In Egypt, there is a tradition of what's called the first time.
Zep Tepe, yes.
Zep Tepe. In Turkey, the word Tepe, which goes along with Göbekli Tepe, carries 25 separate definitions. And many of those definitions are, as I've described, logically disconnected from each other, so you can't get to one by knowing the other. If you go to an Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary, so far I've been able to verify that at least 20 of those 25 definitions also exist in the Egyptian hieroglyphic language under the root tepe or related roots. So when the Egyptians are talking about tepe, they're talking about the same concept that the Turks are talking about.
Do you think?
And Zep Tepe could very well, in my opinion, refer back to Göbekli Tepe.
See, that's really, really interesting, obviously, and again, it seems to suggest